Hello and welcome to episode 34 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. Welcome to an entertaining discussion of the week's developments in clean energy and transportation. Brian, I think we're a fan podcast for the exciting clean revolution that's taking place in this decade. We're here until 2030 doing this podcast as the world changes, and it's getting rapidly changing every week, is it not?
Oh, it's crazy. The number of news stories, it's surprising.
You think one week it's going to be so busy, it can't be busy next week, and then it is. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about Tesla's full self-driving update is on the way, the new build, as well as an update I got just for my car. And then more news stories about Hyundai's got a recall. And another story from CleanTechnica about our energy production here in Saskatchewan.
All right, and we'll have the much-anticipated return of James's TV Corner, believe it or not.
Whoa!
And in fact, we might even have some special things there. And later in the show, we'll have the much-loved, much-anticipated, much-called-for lightning round, where I will throw headline after headline from the area of clean tech and green revolutions into your face, and you will respond with analysis and insight as you do every week. Brian, I know you prepare for this every week. You spend many hours preparing for the lightning round, and it's going to be a tough one this week. I'll warn you now, okay?
Okay.
All right.
All right.
So I wanted to talk about a story that was on CleanTechnica about our very own province of Saskatchewan, which we talk about frequently. We're in Canada. We're in the prairies. We're in the middle of nowhere. But we're in oil country, and next door to more oil country, which is Alberta, where the oil sands are. And we tend to not want to do green things here, right? We tend to be beholden to the oil industry, and no one even wants to talk about good things that are coming on the horizon as the rest of the world transitions. But they did a story. One person did an analysis on Saskatchewan being sort of an outlier. Sort of a weird place. He says it's not even hard to spell, just hard to spell, but also an interesting and unfortunate outlier. Interesting and unfortunate. That's how Michael Bernard sees a province. So he did an analysis, and I was fascinated, Brian, because we often wonder about this stuff, and he breaks it down. What would it take for our province to get to net zero? We don't have a lot of hydro here. We have some. There's obviously no chance for nuclear or anything like that. There's some opportunities for geothermal, which are getting off the ground now for electricity generation. We hardly have any solar. We have a little bit of wind that's been around for a little while and is expanding slowly. But we have most of the solar that's installed is privately done by First Nations or by individuals and farmers. And, you know, there's no big utility solar farm here, is there?
They've been planning one for ages and ages, but it's still not here yet.
So anyway, he broke it down what it would take for this province of 1.1 million people, which is vast and rectangular, for what it would take. And it was basically $4.6 billion for wind and $8.3 billion for solar electricity. So around $13 billion total to decarbonize our whole power grid, our whole energy. He's talking about everything, though. He's talking about the power in your home, like there's the home heating and building heating and industrial and everything would be how much energy would that take?
So it includes that.
So it's like replacing natural gas and everything else, and it's just theoretical. So about $13 billion. Now, keep in mind that they spent $1.5 billion on carbon capture on one part of one coal plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that, which was a lot of money just to take the carbon out of one coal plant. And of course, $1.5 billion we often ask the question, well, how much solar would have that made if we just put that into solar? The answer is a third of all the solar that we need, according to this person's analysis. Now, what I found particularly interesting is how he approached carbon storage, because energy storage. Energy storage, batteries were not discussed. It's almost like, batteries are too expensive, or something like that. And by the time we ever got around to doing this, I'm sure batteries would not be the same price they are now. And I hate it when people, basically he's using current technologies as if nothing changes and this is a theoretical exercise.
Yeah.
So he went with pumped hydro, which I found interesting. He said there's not a lot of opportunities for pumped hydro here because we don't have mountains, we don't have high hills. We're a pretty flat place, and you need sort of to elevate the water to higher ground and let it come down. And he said that that is 80% efficient, which is something that I've been wondering for a while. A battery, I don't know what a battery efficiency is on a Powerwall or mass grid scale batteries, but it's more than 80% because you have to power the pump to pump it up and then bring it down and turn it into electricity again.
Now, I'm going to interrupt you for a second, but yeah, so pumped hydro is the idea of when you have excess solar power, you pump the water somewhere up high, and then at night when the sun is not shining, you let the water flow down with gravity through a turbine and generate power. It is used all over the world. It's a great system. I came across a weird system on the internet the other day called Energy Vault, and there's a YouTube video that you can go watch if you want, but it's the same principle as pumped hydro, but it uses blocks of concrete. So it's this structure that has various cranes on it. And so the same thing during the daytime when there's lots of solar power, excess solar, this crane essentially builds a building, builds a tower of these big concrete blocks, builds it all up during the daytime, and then at nighttime, one by one, it lowers each one of these bricks. And then as the brick is lowering down to the ground, it captures that energy. So it's apparently as efficient as pumped hydro, or perhaps they're suggesting even more efficient.
Did it seem like a good idea to you? I mean, you watched the video, and we'll try and link to it if we can, but did it seem like a good idea to you?
My gut reaction was it seemed weird and this can't possibly work, but I haven't done the studies. I haven't examined this, and maybe it is simpler to do than something like pumped hydro, which, as you say, might be difficult to do in a place like ours.
Well, I've also found it interesting that he sort of explored where the power corridors were in the province, because that sort of determines where you can put these things, and there weren't that many places. So he just suggested some smaller ones. Did you read the story?
I did, yeah. And I mean, batteries is probably a good solution, but
at the very least, it's got to be
that.
part of the mix, right? The batteries have to be part of the mix. It's just for grid stability, if nothing else. They work so well with stabilizing the grid and saving money in that way.
Yeah.
So, I found it interesting. He went with half solar, half wind. Some futurists will say, well, solar is becoming so cheap that solar and battery storage is the way. But, we're kind of weird here because we have a cold winter. And also, he noted 2 weeks of storage. We needed 2 weeks of storage, which I found interesting. Because we're not the far north where we don't have sunlight in the winter, but our days get short around December, and so we have less solar, but we have lots of sunshine even on those cold days, right?
Typically, but I guess you have to plan for the worst case scenario.
Right, and the worst case scenario is 2 weeks of storage. So yeah, it is possible, and he outlined what would have to go on. So it's very interesting. That's a CleanTechnica story. Could Saskatchewan, Canada meet its domestic energy needs from solar and wind? And the answer, of course, is yes. What do you have for us?
Yeah. Hyundai has had to issue a huge recall of their Kona EV electric car. They're recalling 77,000 Kona EVs, and this is a car that I considered purchasing, and it seems like a great electric car. But unfortunately, there's some problems with fires. So they've issued a recall for 77,000 Kona electric cars, and they're kind of fighting with LG Chem, who made the batteries, over whose fault it is.
Wow. So that the fires, if I understand correctly, are actually in the European version. That has happened a couple of times, right? Or was there one in Toronto too?
One of the first stories was from Montreal.
Oh, Montreal. Okay. So that's a big deal. And do you know that if it's in the battery cell itself, of like the whole pack is going to be, because that could be a huge recall. That's not like a seatbelt or something.
Yeah, well, like I say, they're sort of fighting with LG Chem about who's responsible, but apparently they do have some kind of a fix for it. It found the separator in the battery cell was damaged due to errors in the manufacturing process, indicating the battery cell could be the cause of the fires. The Forensic Fire Service also came up with the similar conclusion that electric problems in the battery pack assembly are assumed to have caused the fires. So I don't know. They have some kind of a fix for it. Otherwise, they maybe wouldn't even be able to do a recall. But it's also important to point out that there are over 200,000 gasoline vehicle fires every year in the U.S. alone.
And that's just hillbillies setting fire to the cars mostly, but they do start on fire. We had an instance in Regina, in our small little city here. Last week it was in the news. A elderly person had a medical problem and somehow hit the accelerator and passed out, I think is essentially what happened. And he crashed into sort of a cement sign, and the vehicle started on fire. It's just it's the worst thing ever. It's bad enough you're unconscious and you crash into something. He was, of course, pulled out very quickly by bystanders and is safe and doing well. But the point is, gas vehicles, I don't know why they start on fire. They shouldn't start on fire that easily, but this one did. And at least with, electric car batteries, it's kind of a slow burn. It starts slow. I mean, it's hard to put out. They tell fire departments when they are on fire, you have to constantly douse them with water for a couple of hours. But it is sort of a slow. It's not a big thing right away. So.
Yeah.
All right, Brian.
Yeah, I remember I was in L.A. once driving down the freeway, and there was a car burning at the side of the freeway in L.A.
Yeah. And there was one on the Trans-Canada. There was no accident. It was just burning. It's like decided to start on fire. It was a pickup truck. It was just burning. And of course, I have my story of the Burger King drive-through, which I think I've said on the show before, where I was driving an old car where of course the alternator wasn't working, so I was driving on battery power just to fire the pistons. So I had a battery charger under the hood. So I could constantly plug it in to charge the battery so I could get a few miles out of it because it wasn't recharging itself. And there was a bad contact made, and I was in the Burger King drive-thru and it started on fire.
Oh, my God.
Talk about your flame-boiled Whopper. Anyway, and the worst thing is that the battery went completely dead and the car turned off. And I was on fire and couldn't go anywhere, and I'm stuck in the Burger King drive-thru with anxious people behind me. But I calmly, as a 20-year-old, got out, hungry stomach and all, and just undid the misfortunate breach of polarity or whatever was going on under there, touching the negative to the positive. The battery came back to life. I started the car, thank God. It was hot and ready to go, and I moved on. That's my had I been a stupider, less faithful person in my own abilities to just address the problem and just sat there, the thing would have started on fire and burnt down a perfectly good Burger King. That's my story.
Yikes.
James's TV Corner, like Brian's TV Corner, but better.
Brian, I watched David Attenborough's A Life on Our Planet. That is a sort of a sequel. Well, it's a life story. It's a summary of the man's 94. He's gonna croak any day now. Like he's barely alive. He's probably more likely to die than I am. And I found it interesting because you haven't seen the show, right? Let's just clear the air here. You're too busy of a man.
No, I haven't.
I found it interesting. I found it. It's not earth shattering, so to speak, but it's interesting. And he frames it with Chernobyl. He starts talking at Chernobyl, and at Chernobyl you see nature thriving while humans are gone. And it's kind of a very powerful image by the end of the film, where he comes back to that and says, we're not worried about the planet surviving. The planet's going to survive in some way or another. The oceans may be dead. There may be problems, but nature will endure. It's just that we will not. So it's a powerful message. So at the end of the film, he offers solutions. And of course, some of them are quickly mentioned, like solar and things like that. But he also went to Europe and looked at rooftop gardening, which is something interesting. Now, I'll just have a little clip here.
Whenever we choose a piece of meat, we too are unwittingly demanding a huge expanse of space. If we all had a largely plant-based diet, we would need only half the land we use at the moment. The Netherlands is one of the world's most densely populated countries. It's covered with small family-run farms with no room for expansion. Despite its size, the Netherlands is now the world's second largest exporter of food.
So they're doing this on rooftop gardens. Because the agricultural community doesn't have a lot of space, they have these rooftop gardens, and they're exporting food. They're not only meeting their needs, they're exporting it. Like tomatoes, lettuce, things that you wouldn't grow in a northern Nordic climate. Your thoughts?
Well, this brings me to Brian's TV corner, which is, I promised last week I was going to get a clip from the CBC series. So I found the show and I found the episode. This is a company that's got rooftop greenhouses in Quebec, but I couldn't figure out how to download the show. So it's on CBC Gem. And I was going to, download and supply a clip so we could play it. But I couldn't figure out how to sort of download the clip to be able to grab the audio. But the show is called We Are Canada. It's on CBC Gem, which is CBC's online TV app. And episode 4 talks about this company that does these rooftop greenhouses. And they feature the one in Montreal, which is enormous and produces tons of food all year round in cold Montreal.
Where does the food go?
It's quite fascinating. It's all locally delivered, so people sign up for it as like a food delivery service, and they do the harvesting in the middle of the night. And when you sign up for the service, you kind of agree to a certain variance in what you get. Like, if they've got lots of tomatoes, then you're going to get tomatoes. If they've got something else, you'll get something else. But they've got, I think, 3 of these rooftop greenhouses now in Quebec, and just looks amazing.
When was the show made?
It's from a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And do you have any sense of how long these rooftop gardens have been around, and are they expanding them?
Yeah, the company, I think they started the first one in 2008, something like that. So, they've been around about a dozen years or so. Yeah. And I believe they have 3 of them in maybe like Montreal, Quebec City, and somewhere else.
So when something's been around for that long, you tend to believe that it's real, and which brings me to my next point of hydrogen. And we've talked about this recently. Oh, yeah. And Alberta, our province next door, has announced a hydrogen. I don't know what they really announced. They just said we're pro hydrogen. They brought in all these people from across the country, but they didn't say exactly what they're doing. They want to make hydrogen, they want to export hydrogen, and they want to make it with natural gas from their oil industry, which is not the ideal way to do it. However, electricity making hydrogen is still quite expensive. So I see stuff around, I see like this morning there was a clip where a news story that there's a hydrogen ferry being tested. So that's interesting. But, Chris Nelder is somebody I follow. He has the Energy Gang podcast, which I highly recommend. And, he's very anti-hydrogen. He says there was a hydrogen boom in 2003, 2004, where everybody was talking hydrogen and billions of dollars were invested. And we're going through that again. But he says there's no real large-scale commercial development of it, the deployment of it. And he says we're not even going to talk about it on our show until somebody does that, until somebody actually deploys a commercial-scale thing, because it's just all hot air, hot hydrogen for now, I guess. And
so to speak.
And he also says that, we were talking about the California ban on ICE vehicle sales in 2035, and a lot of people say, well, it should be earlier than that. It could be earlier than that. And I have a clip here because he's talking about how if you do it sooner, it's actually cheaper.
Doing this would use a lot more electricity, and California had these electricity issues, and wouldn't this make it worse? And in fact, it would make it better, right? The problem with all this stuff is that the changes that we have to make to the grid to accommodate a decarbonized future are expensive, not because they're not cost effective, but just because it costs a lot of money. And if you are selling more kilowatt hours, which today we're not compared to 2003, then finance it easier while reducing electricity rates instead of increasing electricity rates. On top of that, you would then have all these other batteries throughout the state that you could then use to provide more grid flexibility. So moving to this future faster is critical, which is why I think 2035 is too late. I think if you wait that long, it'll actually end up being that, that you'll have to overspend on other grid infrastructure that you could have saved on had you moved to electric vehicles faster.
That's not Chris Nelder, but that's one of his co-hosts on the Energy Gang podcast. And what they're saying is that they're actually using less electricity. So if you're a utility and you're selling less of something and you're then required to quickly adapt to something else, it's going to be not great for you. It's going to be very expensive. But if you make people buy EVs, then suddenly you have a home market and you can start expanding, and that will help you transition to a cleaner grid. Very interesting concept, and something that I'm sure applies to a lot of places around the world, not just California.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I hadn't heard that before. All
right. Well, I also wanted to talk about sort of this quote that the International Energy Agency is forecasting a massive slowdown in the rate of fall of solar costs, and this is something they've been doing for years. Every year they become closer to reality, something that you and I and everybody else in this area has known for 20 years, that things just don't go like this and then level out. They keep going. If you drastically expand the sale of something by tenfold, it's going to go down significantly in price. It's not going to stay the same. So solar has been going down 18% a year since 2010, and the report expects that the rate of cost falls reduces to just 2% a year in the period between now and 2040. And that's just not credible. So I just hate that. It's been a pet peeve of mine. I know that we have a segment on the show. In fact, let's just go there. My pet peeve is the International Energy Agency being unrealistic about the future and everyone else being unrealistic about the future. Come on, people. Things are moving fast and you're going to get left behind horribly. Brian, tell me.
But aren't they just saying that the cost, like at a certain point, solar panels can't get any cheaper? Like, is that what they're saying? Like we're nearing the bottom of how cheap they can get?
That's what they're saying. And every credible expert in the field says, no, we're not even close. I mean, you look at the amount of solar that's in the world and what could be in the world, it's a drop in the bucket, really. And if we actually, move towards the climate and things are cheap now to expand, and it's cheaper, this is the cheapest source of power in most places of the world, then giddy up. It's going to become a lot cheaper than 2% a year. So it's not realistic at all. It's just wishful thinking.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't really sure. And I know that we've talked about, solar big installations hitting record prices of, like 1.6 cents per kilowatt hour. But that seems to me like, isn't that getting close to the bottom?
People have said that at 10 cents and 20 cents and, it can't go any further. Well, it can, apparently. It can. And they expect it to completely go down because it's going to go down. It's going to go down. Trust me. I trust in the experts, not in myself. I am not an expert. I'm simply a discusser. And Brian, we had some feedback, and I wanted to talk more about The Long Way Up because I'm loving it. It is a travel show on prototype electric vehicles, 2 Harley-Davidson electric motorcycles going from the bottom tip of South America up to Los Angeles, on a continent that I know very little about. I will admit that now. I'm ashamed about that, but doesn't get a lot of press. South America does not get a lot of press. I know more about Colombian drug cartels than I do about Bolivia or Argentina. And it's just, my son, the geologist enthusiast, was just, Dad, that's at 15,000 feet and there's a desert up there. What the hell's going on? He says it's just incredible landscapes. And, it's a visually stunning thing to look. And you feel, as a person like you and I, we feel sort of connected to it because we're electric vehicle enthusiasts. And these are 2 guys who are on motorcycles who are electric, and they don't have a lot of range. They're roughly 100 miles or so. And there's no charging infrastructure. Charge Point, no, not Charge Point, but one of the home charging companies put chargers for Rivian. Rivian has 2 electric pickup trucks prototypes. And by the way, I'll say this again, they were all just hot off the line. They had to have a Rivian guy fly into the middle of nowhere to fix it once because it wasn't working. Prototypes that barely work and haven't been tested are doing this incredible journey, and it's riveting because they're in the middle of nowhere, and if it breaks down, well, if you run out of charge, and a lot of times what they're doing is they're actually pulling the Rivian with a gas van. They had to bring in a gas van because there's just no charging. So they put these chargers, but they don't charge very fast. The Harley-Davidson Livewire motorcycles charge very slowly. They don't have even a level 2 charging. They charge at level 2 the same as level 1, which is like 12 hours. And there's no fast chargers. Not a single fast charger in that whole route. So if they had that, it would be easier. And we had some pushback on YouTube about that because, they're saying, well, they didn't like the motorcycles. But they wish that they did the trip on diesel motorcycles, or not diesel, but gas motorcycles. And I'm sure I would have felt the same way because it was a huge hassle. But if you had the charging infrastructure and you had a bit better motorcycle, say a couple of years from now, it would be amazing because it's so quiet.